one mum who's apologised as she's
Yeah.
come in, who said, I had a bit of a thing this morning, so he'll say it back. He'll
Yeah.
say it to you.
Yeah,
So she
absolutely.
said it.
Yeah. And that's where that scripting comes from as well. It's I don't know how to cope with this social situation, but I saw something similar on YouTube last night and I'm going to use those words. Marley does that all the time. Yeah, so limited understanding of unwritten rules of interaction. So very literal. So you can see here that the interviewer is saying, please have a seat, and the guy picks up the seat. You know, it's a big one. There's a really great example where a teenager with autism, mum leaves a note on the kitchen bench saying, can you put the chicken in the oven? I'll be home at 6. She gets home, the chicken's in the oven, but the oven's not on. So it's very literal, you know, and they will often correct you. So if you sort of say, oh, you know, you'll be right, it'll only take you 2 minutes, they'll say to you, actually, no, it'll take me 4 minutes. And you mean it's not going to take you long, but in fact, they are very specific, yeah. And you think they're being a bit of a smarty, but in fact, they think they're doing you a favour by correcting you. So,
like a little bit of shush. Let's have a little bit of shush.
Yeah. Poor executive function. So that's all about our ability to plan, be organised, auditory processing. So that's all about taking in instruction and being able to follow it. So if I say to a child with autism, okay, I want you to get your shoes, go into the storeroom, grab some flippers, grab me a kickboard, come back, hop in the water and do 2 laps. They'll probably come back to you with a kickboard and that's about it. Their working memory is usually very limited. So what that means is their ability to retain information and instructions. They'll often hear the first thing you said and the last thing you said. And that's why it's so important that we show what we want rather than tell, because their ability to convert what you're saying into action is very, very limited. So we keep it short, instructions short. In this lap, we're going to work on breathing. In this lap, we're going to work on kicking, but we don't do both.
And a lot of times as teachers, we just go, we're going to do this,
Yeah.
You know, even with the 3-year-olds today, I said, right, we're going to put our life jackets on in the big pool, then we're going to come back to the little pool, and then we're going to do this, you know, like, because you just do it,
Yeah.
you know. So, but even for the 3-year-olds, sometimes we have to take that step back and go, right, 1 or 2 instructions and that's it, you know.
Yeah. They're often very, very uncoordinated and clumsy. So we're going to talk a little bit later about what we call proprioception and autism, but it basically means that their gross and their fine motor skills are poor. So often they're very clumsy, very uncoordinated. You'll see arms everywhere. You have a young boy on a Wednesday night who's a pure example of that. They have issues with perfectionism, particularly girls, fear of failure. Marley, when she first started swimming, would do 3 strokes and then look at the teacher to make sure that she was doing an okay job, because she felt that if she wasn't perfect, the teacher wouldn't like her anymore. So it's a real issue. So it's about trying to build them up and make sure they're okay, and making mistakes is okay. High levels of anxiety about the unknown, so real need for control, and can have obsessive interests. Garbage collection's a big one for kids with autism. For some reason, they love the whole concept of someone coming every week, taking their rubbish and putting it in a thing and driving away. They think that's amazing. Trains and princesses, big ones. Yeah, but it can be about anything, really. So sensory processing disorder. So it's a very common co-disorder with autism. We talk about sensory seeking and sensory avoiding behaviours. So sensory seeking is their sensory input is underdeveloped, so they're constantly seeking more input. So that can be the children that you see that go to a flashing light and stare at it. So that's their craving visual input. They're children that will get into your personal space and hug you, craving tactile input. Children that will chew their hand or a noodle or something like that, craving oral input. So all that sort of thing, that's sensory seeking behaviour. And then sensory avoiding is the children that don't want you to touch them, that won't wear goggles, so they don't like goggles on their face, and they will often take them on, put them off, take them on, put them off. And often children have a mixture of both. So there will be some situations where they'll be seeking, some situations where they'll be avoiding. But it will be an overwhelming part of their autism in almost all cases. The sensory stuff is probably one of the most important things. It's not yet considered a separate disorder formally. It is considered part of autism. In America, however, it is considered a separate disorder, and most people, it's pretty well accepted that it's only a matter of time before it will be considered a separate disorder. So we'll go over to the 7 senses. So we well-known senses, obviously: see, smell, taste, touch, and hear. 2 not so well-known senses are proprioception and vestibular. So proprioception is all about knowing what our arms and legs are doing. So you'll often, children of 3 or 4 have poor proprioception usually. So we'll say to a 3-year-old, when they first start doing freestyle, okay, we want to do this with our arms, and the child goes like this. And that's because their ability to know what their arms are doing is limited. They don't have the coordination yet. But often you'll get a 6-year-old that you'll say, do this with your arms, and they're doing this. And that is because they actually in their brain think they're doing this, but they don't actually realise what their arms are doing. It's our intrinsic nature. So if you close your eyes and put your finger on, I can put my finger on my nose, because even though I can't see my arm, I know what my arm is doing. Children with autism really struggle with that. So things like balance, coordination, riding bikes, swimming, all of those sort of things that require coordination are difficult. And you will often get children with autism that are in the same level for years. And that's why, because their proprioception's poor. So there are ways around that. When we talk about vestibular, we're talking about balance and inner ear. So they're the children that you see that lie on their back to float, and they're up like this, and they've got their eyes shut because they think they're under the water. And that's poor vestibular sensory input. So they actually think when they're lying on a 45-degree angle that they're actually flat, because their brain isn't aware of where their body is in space. Does that make sense? Yeah. So all of these things sort of impact, I guess, on swimming. So in terms of general life, a sensory seeker will spin, rock, be upside down, bounce. They're all over the place. That's Marley. That's my daughter. Constantly, you see her in the water and she's spinning around. She's upside down. She's doing flips, and it's because, and that's all about proprioception and vestibular input. She's constantly seeking that. Her body struggles to know where it is in space. So by flipping and doing all those sort of things, that she gets a reference from the ground and things like that as to where her body is. They may be loud, so they may actually not understand how loud they are, probably a bit like me and Estella. But you'll often hear them come into reception and they're really loud, and their parents are trying to say, just quieten down a bit, because they have an underdeveloped oral sensory input, so they actually don't realise how loud they are. Limited understanding of personal space, so they'll be in your face all the time. They'll talk to you really close. They'll constantly be trying to hug you, touch other children. They'll often be quite rough because they don't realise because they have difficulty knowing where their body is. They'll often not understand the concept of soft and hard touching. And constantly look for sweet and salty food and mouth things. So we talked about that. So in the pool environment, so they'll often be bouncing from platform to the wall, constantly be touching other children, have difficulty with the concept of personal space, chewing on all the equipment. They love being underwater, so they get a lot of pressure from being under the water. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of things going around outside. So they're distracted by kids over here, and there's noise and all of that sort of stuff. So they have a lot of difficulty paying attention. They use a lot of force, so they'll often bash the water. And they like their goggles to be really tight. So it's all about, pressure and that constant.
Yes, she's a classic.
So sensory avoiders.
She's broken. She's broken so many pairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sensory avoiders don't like being touched. So often children with autism, you need to kind of gauge, are they a seeker or are they a avoider? Often children who don't like being touched or have autism will say, oh, I don't want you to touch me, I'll do it myself. Particularly their head or their face. Head's a big one. They don't like loud noise, so this sort of thing, and lots of visual activity. So they'll avoid activity where they're not on the ground. So jumping into a pool for a child who is a sensory avoider can be really distressing for them because they're not on the ground and they don't really understand where their body is in space. So by having to jump, their brain just goes into overdrive. It's too much. So that's why we bring it right back down to sitting on the side of the pool first, getting them really comfortable with where their surroundings are before we get them to stand and jump. Yeah. So roller coasters, heights can be a really big issue. They'll often have really strong food sensitivities, don't like strong odours. So they're the kids that will, really pick up on every smell in the surroundings. Really difficulty making eye contact. I've had one of my nephews say to me, it's a bit, when someone asks him to look at them in the eye, it's like asking him to look at the sun. It's painful. So usually I'll say to a child with autism, I need you to look my way, not in the eye. But if you can look, at my ear or something, it tells me that you can hear me, rather than look me in the eye. And you'll often see them walking on tiptoes. They have very sensitive feet.
I've seen heaps of kids walking on tiptoes.
Yeah, that is another thing altogether, though, isn't it? Isn't there something?
It could be,
Yeah.
but
It's got a
it
name.
is an often an element of autism to do with that sensory avoiding. Obviously, the bottom of your feet is quite sensitive, and they often don't like that feeling on the bottom of their feet. Don't like tags and things like that on their clothes. So in the pool environment, it's difficult to teach them because they don't want you to touch them. So you need to think outside the square in terms of the equipment that we use. They can become really stressed with the loud noise and the busy activity of the pool. So that's really tricky. They can become stressed when asked to put their face in or head back. So water in their ears or that vestibular input can be really overwhelming. They can also spend large amounts of time underwater. So underwater can be really a sensory seeking behaviour, but also a sensory avoiding behaviour. When it's really loud and really bright, as soon as you go underwater, that stops. And it's quiet and they're getting pressure and everything can settle down. So often for kids with autism, it's difficult to keep them with their head out of the water.
So if it's a one-on-one, that's okay because you can understand it. But if it's
really
group,
tricky.
It's a group class. For me, safety is always number one, and having other kids watch that can be detrimental to everybody's safety. So in that situation, not getting to know your kid and getting to know what kind of a day he's had, and I would, and I have before, say, we have to keep our head above the water.
That's right.
Or let's try something different, instead of focusing on that. I said, right, we're going to do this now and take his mind away or her mind away from being under the water.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're letting one kid be under the water and then you're letting, got 4 kids and you're saying, and the parents who are watching, they don't know that child potentially has any medical issues. So it's very difficult from a teaching point of view and a disciplining and a safety. So
But if you can't stop them, I sometimes say to them, oh, he's not listening to me, he's under the water, look at him, he's under the water, he's not listening to me. Because if you can't stop them, you can't stop them.
Yeah.
Something great that I remember you told me last year in Chelsea was when I had a kid that had autism in my class, and he just kept going under the water, and I didn't fully understand at the time. And then you explained like how it's just the being quiet under the water.
Yeah.
So what we ended up getting was, because it was in this pool on the little step, and he'd lie there, have his ears in when he wasn't swimming, so he'd still be under the water.
Right.
He can close his
His
eyes and have his head back.
Face was up,
Yeah.
but it'd still have that quiet until
Yeah.
it was his turn
That's good.
to go.
Yeah.
I suppose it's easier to
Yeah.
do that in this pool.
Yeah,
than
well,
when you're
yeah.
over
When you're in
here,
the big pool.
and then you've got the safe. You're like, it's a total.
Yeah.
We're actually going to talk a little bit about that later on. We've got a couple of little scenarios that I thought we'd talk about as a group, and that's one of them.
Yeah,
So and also not wearing goggles, obviously, in the pool. So for a sensory avoider, not wanting to hold hands, you know, and that's fine. Sometimes what I do is I chuck them in the middle and we hold hands and we do ring a rosy around them or whatever they want, you know. So we've talked about proprioception and vestibular. So sometimes what we need to be able to do, because we have difficulty expressing ourselves verbally, so our children can sometimes find that hard to process the words that we're saying. They may not like to be touched, and we want to show them visually. But if we've got a child that has proprioceptive issues, so we can say to them, I want you to do this with your arms, but in fact they're doing this and they think that they're doing big arms. We have to physically demonstrate what the correct feeling is. So when I'm doing my big arms, my muscles feel like this. And that may be actually holding a child's hand and physically moving their arms. So when you have a child with poor vestibular function, and you can see that you're showing them that they need to do arms like this, but they're not doing it, then we may need to move to actually physically manipulating their arms.
Is that a mirror?
Absolutely, a mirror is great. So that's a really good one if you've got a child that doesn't want to be touched. So it's very difficult for you to... So what I'll often say to parents is, this is what's happening when you're at home, because home is a much safer, more comfortable place. So it's easier for them to practice this sort of stuff at home when there's not all this other stuff going on. And I'll say to them, lie on the bed, and just get them to manipulate their arm up and over. And
Stop, sit down, because I can see he needs to move.
so it's about giving him the opportunity to move, because he's getting something from that. That's self-medication, that needing to jump, but doing it in a safe way. But also, even, if you are changing things, you're using the picture board. So
So bring the picture board into that class,
Absolutely.
because I don't have it in that class, because there's no undiagnosed.
I would use the picture board. Yeah.
Kids don't have to be diagnosed.
No,
No,
I use
I
it all the
agree.
time. Like,
Yeah.
even if they're not, and I look at them and go, yeah, look, I think you probably are. I'll often use it. Or if I've got a kid that's really anxious, I'll bring it in, and it just helps to go, okay, well, this part here is out of routine, but the rest of it is in routine, and they can see that because it's in front of them. Whereas if you change one little thing in the class, as far as they're concerned, you may as well have changed everything, because they don't know then what's coming next, and that's that unknown.
And he's not really verbal, so I'm
Yeah.
finding it doesn't matter what I say, there's not a lot of... It doesn't matter if I give him an instruction or I don't.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if I show him or I don't. If that's not what the routine is, then he's...
Yeah,
He's
well,
going-
he's been bombarded.
Yeah.
How old
so,
was he?
4.
so I'd probably use the pictures. We're going to watch a video now,
Yeah.
guys, just really quickly.
The only thing I have about the picture board and being undiagnosed is that, do you think maybe it might freak the parents out?
If I get all the children involved, I'll make,
Yeah.
I can have in the past made it very subtle.
Yeah.
Where I've just said I'm going to
You
try
haven't-
this with the kids and just
It
get
helps
them
the young
involved.
ones anyway.
I get them to take it in turns, and I use
Yeah.
it for the whole class. And I'll usually say to parents, I think it's going to make the class run better. And I don't say to them anything about autism.
No, and
I
that's
tell them it's been scientifically proven to increase their ability, and the parents just laugh at me.
So, guys, we're going to have a look at a video. and then we're gonna finish. Okay, so we'll talk as it goes on. I just want to see if I can make it a bit louder.
No,
So
no,
this
could
little
you just
boy's-
kick that screen towards us.
Yeah, the light's just hitting.
Just tilted up.
Oh,
That's
look at
better.
that.
Thank you. So this little boy's low functioning. Sorry,
Yeah,
it's-
no,
I
you're
don't know
right.
whether it's.
Always wanted Daniel to learn how to swim. Come on, Daniel. Let's go. I was not confident that they would be able
So he's stimming.
to swim.
You see him moving his hands.
Question about whether he's going to be successful or not. They were just willing to put him in the water and see what he could do.
Daniel, look at Miss Tara. Ready to get in the pool? Thank you. Go in or get wet? We have 10 seconds. Go in or get wet. My name is Tara Gertsch. I am the co-owner of Martar Swim School. Okay, so let's get our schedule. I have been teaching him for 6 years. I first started with Daniel. He used to spit. He used to fight. He used to grab. He used to not communicate at all. Can you help me point? Once you get to know him, you know what his yes and his no is. So we always start with a barbell, which is a flotation device to help put their body on top of the water in a prone position so they can practice kicking. 1, 2, 3,
It reduces the amount she needs to hold him, which is really good.
space it. All down. There you go. What's next? Kickboard. This way. We move on to a kickboard where they are above the water, practicing their kicking, as half of swimming is kicking. If you can't kick properly, you will sink. You get 5 seconds. 5 seconds. Go. Go under.
So that's reward. That's stimming. See how he's doing this because he's feeling the bubbles. So that's real sensory seeking
Follow
stuff.
the directions. You've done what you're supposed to be doing on that piece of equipment. He gets 10 seconds underwater.
So that's the reward as well. He
Yeah.
needs to do that.
5 more seconds.
Now see how she's saying to him 5 more seconds and he's just staring at her?
Go back under.
He doesn't know what 5 more seconds means.
No.
She needs to be saying, you can go back under the water for 5 more seconds. Because he's just looking at her going, oh, what's 5 more seconds mean? So this is about where we need to be specific.
Okay. It's time to swim. Okay. Pass legs. Do arms.
Maybe if you counted.
Then we move on
She
to the
counted.
swimming aspect.
Yeah.
Good, Daniel. Good.
So she's got her arms up and she's getting him to reach to her arms. That's part of that proprioception stuff. She's trying to get him to imagine.
Beautiful. Nice arms. Keep going with your arms. Then he was swimming beautifully with his arms under the water. So then I had my fingers under here going like this for him to reach here so he was at least extending his arms.
So very visual.
Grab it. Reach. All the way to the wall. Keeping those feet down. Let's cover up swimming. Move the duck. Yeah, that one's going where? There. That's a good boy. Now let's look. Dana, let's look. What's it time for? Rings? Yes? Alright, where's the rings? Where are they? We wrap up every single lesson with the same 3 components. We do rings, jumps, and floats. What color do you want? Okay, look. Show me. Which one is the green one? Where's green? Green. Daniel, when he started, actually, we couldn't get him under the water. We could not get him to go under the water, get those rings, save our life. Go get it.
Now it's taken them 6 years to get him to this point.
Component is absolutely 100% so that we can get their faces in the pool. So many children with autism cannot blow their nose. That idea of any sensory on their face. We have lots of children once we taught them how to blow their nose underwater or blow bubbles. They can now actually blow their nose on land. Purpose of the jumps, which is a huge component, is it practices.
See him stimming?
Don't teach a child how to get off of a pool deck into the water, then when it happens, they'll panic. If they haven't had that practice time, they will panic and they will drown. Drowning is one of the leading causes of death of children with autism, and it's preventable. What's left?
And the whole pool's empty.
Yes, it's very quiet.
We
Yeah.
do floating every lesson, and then most of the time remind the kids, if you fall into a pool, instead of screaming, instead of, panicking and going
It's one of the challenges we have here, is that it's so noisy.
Having said that, I work for the special school with the swimming program, and they are very much encouraging of actually having everything together.
Yeah,
But what they tend to do is they tend to find a smaller facility, particularly for those that have autism, where they all can join in, but it's just like that group, so it might be a group of 6.
yeah, yeah.
It's not quite so bad.
If he had his choice, he would do it all day, every day of the week. That's how much he enjoys the water.
It's a whole different world for them when they're in the water. It's unbelievable to watch kids with autism.
Beautiful. Guys, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about?
Yeah, in terms of diagnosis,
Yep.
and age and how long that process is and all that, what do we?
Most children will be diagnosed by the time they go to school. Usually when they start school, that's when the wheels fall off, because before then their life is quite insular, even at kinder. Whereas when they start going to school, that's when they're really interacting with friends, and it becomes quite obvious that there's a difference. Unfortunately, diagnosis can take a long time. So, for example, with us, it took a year for us to even get an appointment.
I think sometimes it's also good to remember that you have 2 problems. You have the child that has the autism, and you have the parents who don't want to know.
Yes.
You fight 2 fronts, okay? So, and I must admit, I see it a lot.
Yeah.
There are just parents who just do not want to think that there's anything wrong with their child. So it's a very gently approach. And
Who
then
usually starts is it usually their GP or the parents going to the doctors? Or?
The school will often say something, or the parent will notice. So in my case, I noticed something was wrong.
with me, although Catherine's not autistic, but she definitely has learning difficulties, it was kinder. So the ball got rolling for her at kinder straight away. So, yeah, and it's different. It is different for autism because it does present differently for everybody.
Yeah.
So whereas Catherine was just behind the 8 ball the whole time. So yeah, and her sensory at 3 was like she was 1. So,
Yeah.
you know.
And some parents truly just don't have a clue.
But the thing is that from our perspective as teachers, there can be really small things we can do that the parent doesn't even know about. You know, that where we are showing them rather than telling them, and we are, you know, aware of, we can look at them and go, okay, well, this is going on, I need to be aware of this, and we can talk to the kids. The parents don't need to even, you know, whether that they know or not kind of doesn't matter. We address it in this way because we know this works. This reduces anxiety. And so often, you know, I've taught a kid and I've thought you've got autism, and then 3 years later the parent said, oh, I've just got a diagnosis. But it's not my position to say,
No.
you know, but I look at the child and I go, you're autistic, I'm going to teach you as though you are. Because I know, whether you are or not to me is irrelevant. I know that this is going to work for you.
More a matter of us thinking in the way of this teaching method will suit this child.
Yeah, and we talk about,
irrespective of autism or not.
That's right.
This teaching
Yeah.
method will match you.
they're you know, what we can get out of them at the end of the day is the same. They talk about autism being a different operating system. So where the world is a Windows computer and children with autism are Macs. They do the same thing ultimately, but they get there in a different way. And so it's just us being able to understand how we can get the best out of them and the most out of them.
I think too that there's visual learners.
Yeah.
And visual learners to me are always the ones that need the cue, they need the showing, they need the pick board if that's what it takes. Doesn't necessarily mean that they've got a disability, because that's the way that they are. So it's kind of, then that area kind of becomes a little bit grey, and that's kind of nice in a way, because then you can actually explore how you're actually going to get the most out of the kids without using what you normally would use to teach a kid to see. So, and also it sort of doesn't put you in that position where you're thinking, I think this kid might be autistic, but parents obviously don't have any idea, but you also tend to, you don't have to then think, I'm not going to confront them, but you know, I'm thinking all the time, this kid's got autism. That might not be the case, but
Yeah.
I'm going to teach them this way, because I think they might be visual learners.
Yeah, but you also might have a kid who's anxious and hasn't got autism.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's exactly
And
right.
picture boards are
And do
great
the
for kids that
same,
are
yeah,
anxious,
yeah.
you know, whether they have
worked
autism
out,
or
we
not.
just had took somewhere else, and there's a lot of constant yelling at this child. And I could, once she was gone, and I actually could see, it's not that she was naughty or anything, she just got a bit anxious because the other child was more advanced than her. So
Yeah.
she was worried that she might have to do the same thing. And I just reminded her, so, no, you're different, you don't have to do the same. She's just been in the class longer, so she's learned a bit more.
Yeah.
She comes down straight away.
Yeah.
Oh, is that
Yeah, well, I've got a little boy that, you know, I take over to the big pool, and as soon as I take him over there, he starts shivering, and I say to him, see what these two are doing? You don't have to do that, because they've been in this class longer. You and I are going to do something different. You're going to hold on to me, and you can let go whenever you're ready to let go. You know, and he'll stop shivering straight away, you know, but it's about addressing what you know that they're going to be anxious, and what is the most likely reason, and address that. You know, and it's so they just need so much reassurance.
So now she'll come up to me and she'll say, oh, Lara's going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. And I go, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So she knows now.
So guys, thanks very much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you got something out of it.
Hope it helped you.
Yes, you did. Don't trust me, you did. I really I appreciate the fact that it's late and you know. Yeah.
I feel at stake sitting at home.
Thanks.
I'll come and polish it off.
No, you bloody
Thanks,
will.
Michelle.
I've got
Michael, thank you in particular for going and getting your apples. Have we got enough?
They're all flowery.
I might just photocopy one.
Just need one more.
Can you take apples
You
back?
right? No,
Sue, yeah, can you take apples back? They're all flowery.
I'll take that apple.
Yeah, it'd be last year's.
Yeah,
You sure?
What's today, the 4th?
No, but like I bought a bag of them. Can you just take them back and say, no, I'm returning these? Give me my money back.
So it says
Okay,
date
right,
of
I'll do
training
that.
and
Yes,
location.
I believe
It's
that's
the,
the other bit that's small.
Oh, the 9th.
Yeah.
And what's Michelle's last name?
Payne, P-A-Y-N-E.
Oh, thank you. What are you? Thank you.
I was actually joking.
Anybody else need one?
Thanks.
Sue, you want one?